What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Backstage Journal podcast. I'm Rhett, and this is officially the first episode of Season 3. Really excited about this season. Got some new things happening, some things that are changing, some things that are staying the same. Overall, though, I think this is going to be the best season of the podcast yet. So if you're new here, welcome. Primarily before, this podcast has existed exclusively in audio form on, iTunes and Google Play and all that kind of stuff. But I think the biggest shift I'm making for season 3 is moving it onto YouTube in conjunction with all of the normal audio podcast places. So if you are listening to the podcast and you want to catch the video form of the whole show, including the interviews with the guests, it's happening on my second channel, Rhett Shull Studio. If you just type in Rhett Shull Studio in YouTube, it'll pop up. And if you're finding this on the YouTube channel for the first time, and this is your first episode of the Backstage Journal podcast, welcome. This is a show I've been doing for 2 years now. Year and a half, 2 years? I want to say 2 years. Anyway, it's season 3. Each season is a little bit different than the last. Last season, my wife, Tilly, co-hosted with me. This season, she's taking a step back because she's starting school again. She took last year off of school, and so she's basically helping me run the channel. She's helping me run the website and all that stuff in conjunction with going to school for nursing. So with all that, we decided to just take a step back and let me do the show. Another thing that's going to be slightly different this year is each episode is going to be heavily guest focused. I really enjoy getting to talk to people in the music world. And it's not just going to be guitar players this season. I really want to branch out and start talking to more producers and songwriters and just creative people in general who are not just guitar players. But with that said, this first episode is a conversation with arguably one of the best guitar players alive today, and that's TOSIN ABASI. I've been wanting to sit down and talk with TOSIN for a long time, and we were finally able to make it happen a few weeks ago. And man, what a great guy. I really enjoyed the conversation that we had over Zoom. Pandemic still being what it is here in early 2021. We're doing all this stuff over Zoom, which is fine because he's out in LA and I'm here in Atlanta, and it would be kind of a tough thing to fly out for one episode. Anyway, I digress. We're going to get into the interview with TOSIN in a moment. Like I said, though, if you're new to the Backstage Journal podcast, there's a few things that we do here on pretty much every episode. The first thing is, and the primary thing, is taking voicemails from you guys, the listener. So every episode, we're going to have a voicemail from a listener. It can be a question, a comment, a concern. And the way you leave the voicemail is to call the Google Voice number 470-222-5851. So let's jump into the first voicemail of season 3.
Hey, Rhett. My name is Scott. I'm a singer-songwriter and a guitar player from Phoenix, Arizona. I discovered all of your content about a year ago, and I've been religiously watching you since then. I think you make great stuff for the young musician. My question is this. I really want to start to put together a home studio to do what you do, where you make tracks and, you record guitar and vocals and you program drums and play bass. What gear should I prioritize? Do you have any recommendations for building this and making it a studio that I could use to work in the business of production? So thank you. I hope you get to this. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks for the voicemail, Scott, and I really appreciate the kind words, man. Yeah, that's a really good question and a really relevant question that I think a lot of musicians have found themselves curious about in the last year with, gigs and everything drying up. A lot of people are starting to work and record and produce from home for the first time. So no matter what type of studio setup or anything like that you might be trying to build, I think there's a few things that are important to keep in mind across the board. The first thing is start with a great source. Okay. So if you're recording yourself, practice, like hone in your skills on your instrument. Start with, for guitar players, start with a good sounding rig. Start with, a decent guitar and amp setup. Really understand how to get the tones and the sounds that you're looking for. So start with a good source. The next thing is how to accumulate or acquire the right pieces of gear in the right order. I think the first thing that you're going to want to do is get a decent interface, a decent audio interface. Now, you can, depending on what your budget is, you can spend a couple $100s on it. You can spend a couple $1,000s on it. I probably wouldn't recommend the latter if you're just starting out. So what I would look for is a good 2 to 4 channel input interface, depending on what you're trying to do. If it's just going to be you producing mostly in the box, meaning like in your computer and using software instruments and drum programming, things like that, I think a good 2-channel interface is a great place to start. And depending on your budget, that could be something from Focusrite. It could be something from, Universal Audio. There's a lot of options out there. And the reality is technology has gotten to the point where even the budget interfaces now have good, clean sounding mic pre's, transparent mic pre's, and they have really good converters for the money. Not the best conversion out there, but good for the money. And then, now that you have an interface and a way to get into the computer, I would say you're going to need a decent way to monitor, especially if you're going to be mixing. Now, if you're on a budget, I think a good place to start would be a good pair of headphones, a good pair of cans. I have a couple options. Actually, these ones I'm wearing right now, these blue Mix-Fi headphones are pretty good. They're designed for mixing. They've got different profiles on them that you can, dial in, including a super flat profile so it's not coloring the sound. There's plenty of other options out there. What are those? The DT770 Studios from, let me see, hold on. The Beyerdynamic DT770 Studios. I've had those for a while too. I think those are great options as well. Or you could go the studio monitor route, which is, there's plenty of options out there. Once you got a decent interface and a decent way to monitor, then I think it depends on your workflow. What are you trying to do? Are you going to be tracking in the box mostly, right? You might be using DI amp sim plugins and soft synths and drum programs. Well, then I think you're in a good place to start. If you're wanting to record amps and acoustic instruments, you're going to need at least one decent microphone. And again, this is like everything else. There's plenty of options out there now for all different types of budgets. However, if you're looking for one mic to start with to do everything on, if you're on a budget, a Shure SM57, $100 microphone. It's used on just about every record that's ever been recorded since the microphone came out decades ago. You can't beat a 57 for simplicity, for price, and you can basically hammer nails with the thing when you're done recording with it. You have a little bit more money to spend. I like this microphone, the SM7B. To me, this is like the king of one mic to do everything. It's a killer vocal mic. Sounds great on amps. You can use it on acoustic instruments. I mean, this is an incredibly versatile mic, a little bit more expensive than the 57. So yeah, I think decent interface, decent way of monitoring what you're recording and mixing, and then a decent microphone after you've started with a good source. None of this stuff is going to make a, bad sounding amp sound good, or it's not going to make a cheap $200 acoustic sound like a vintage, well-worn in Martin or Gibson, right? What it is going to do though is do a really great job of translating your source into your DAW. And speaking of DAW, that's the last key to this puzzle. You want to stick with a DAW. If you want to do this professionally, I'd recommend starting off with something, like if you're a Mac user, Logic is a great place to start for production. I know Ableton is becoming increasingly popular. I've never used Ableton, but plenty of producer friends of mine are switching to Ableton. And of course, the old standby is Pro Tools, which I think is the most expensive of those three DAWs. I'm not actually sure how much Ableton is, but anyways, I digress. And what you want to do is learn that program inside and out. You want to learn the hotkeys. You want to learn the workflow. You want to learn how to edit and mix. You want to learn the stock plugins and what the stock plugins do well, and really invest in learning a program so you can work quickly and efficiently in that program before you try something else. So hope that helps, Scott. Like I said, if you want to leave a voicemail question for next week's episode, you can do so by calling the Google Voice number 470-222-5851. All right. Let's jump into the interview with TOSIN. Like I said, this happened late 2020, so about a month ago. He and I jumped on and had a great Zoom call. And I'm really excited to share this episode with you guys, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, here is TOSIN Abasi. So yeah, man, thanks for doing this. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, you know. Obviously, I've known you and Rick have been friends for quite some time now, you know? How did you guys originally get in touch?
I think I ran into Rick at NAMM last year, and he might have emailed me a few months before that just about doing something on his channel.
Yeah.
So, you know how NAMM is. It's just like your head is spinning because you're like running into friends and recognizing people, and it's just so we didn't get a long time to talk, but it was cool to meet him. And then that's the only time we've actually been in the same physical space, because it was at NAMM. But we talk every once in a while, you know. We just shoot the shit. It's fun.
NAMM is weird like that, you know. You have your NAMM friends, the people that you only see once a year in Anaheim, you know, and for that reason I'm really bummed it's not happening this year. But it's crazy that it even happened back in January. I mean, for sure, COVID was going around at NAMM.
Dude,
there's no way it wasn't.
You're right. And I didn't process that until months into COVID. And then I was like, wait a minute, dude. We were in a convention center with tens of thousands of people and a lot of Chinese vendors. And yeah, bro. It's kind of, I think at least in LA, there's an idea that COVID has been here longer than, you know, when we actually started testing for it and stuff like that. And it's likely because of international travel and things like NAMM.
Yeah.
So,
crazy. So my mom is a nurse, and she works at the big Emory hospital here in Atlanta. And they've now gone back to November of last year, and people that passed away at the hospital around November, December timeframe, and now attributing those deaths to COVID, you know, because Atlanta is such a hub with the airport and everything here that it was going around, man. And I know people who got NAMthrax, and they were talking about it being way worse than normal this year, and then finding out that they have the antibodies and they caught it at NAMM.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's crazy times. You were mentioning seeing all the homies at NAMM and stuff like that. I feel like if you're in a touring band, it's even like more so. Have you done some touring with your band or at any point, or is it?
You mean the guys I'm playing with here at the house, or what?
Yeah, I remember that you kind of were advertising some live performance stuff, some stream stuff.
No, so that band I actually put together for the live streams for the COVID thing. So, you know, I've done kind of the hired gun thing for the last 10 years since I got out of AIM, and have always kind of wanted to have my own thing. And that's actually part of what I wanted to talk to you about tonight. And so it's basically like my sort of dream team group of guys. Some I've went to music school with, some I've played with for years. And the plan is, you know, we've got one more live show happening in January, and we're going to try and release a single for that show. And then the plan is to spend 2021 working on either an EP or full length or a series of singles. We don't know yet. So that when the live stuff comes back, we will go out and do it, but we'll see.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. I mean, you can like really take this time to dial stuff in, and then you'll be ready to go once like venues open back up and stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, jumping off of that, I didn't mean to start the conversation around COVID, but it is timely. How is the whole shutdown, pandemic, quarantine thing, like what has that been like for Animals as leaders? Have you guys been writing, been working on stuff? Have you been rehearsing or what? Mainly
writing and recording. We we took it as an opportunity to, finish the album we were already working on. Funnily enough, that album was kind of going to be put on hold because of the touring we had scheduled. And then COVID made the touring evaporate. And so it was a little tricky at first because we were hesitant to get in the same room together. And so we burned a few months just trying to figure out what was the smartest, safest way to do this, But yeah, we've basically decided to write the album, but kind of release singles starting next year. So we don't actually have all of it written per se, and even the ones that are written, we're still choosing what goes. But we're going to be trickling out songs to people. So, and this might be interesting to you because I feel like you're kind of, you have a few options of how you want to release your next body of work,
Yeah.
And I think we're in a really interesting area with how people consume music because of streaming basically and playlists and how algorithms really want you to basically engage consistently as far as how they prioritize content.
Right.
And so if you dump 12 songs at one moment in time and expect them to like circulate the same way as if you did one every month or week.
Yeah. The way I kind of think about it isn't, the best way I can relate to it is in terms of YouTube. It would be like if me or Rick or anyone else basically took 6 months recording all of our videos for the year and then dumped them all at one time. It just doesn't work that way. The algorithm doesn't work that way. The promotion, the engagement, people don't consume content that way really anymore. I feel like we've gotten so used to being able to binge stuff and then being able to kind of consume things in more of a serial way from podcasts and things like that. So for us, I think the single route, it works better for everyone's schedules and workflows and everything, and I think from a content consumption perspective, I think it just works better.
I totally agree, and I think you're right. The analogies to other platforms, it's kind of all becoming the same sort of thing. And I kind of want to embrace it. It's a thought I've had even, a few years ago where I'm kind of like, I wonder if we should reconsider how we release stuff, considering how people consume it.
Yeah.
But I think, it makes sense. And I don't know if you're going to do it this way, but I think what I'm curious about is like putting out singles, but also not having the whole album finished and then being able to write in a way that responds to like feedback,
Dude, I had actually not considered that until you just said it, but that's brilliant. It's as if like if you were able to direct a movie and then release the first act of the movie and then watch the response of the people in the theater and then kind of shape the second and third act to fit. That's killer.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, it could be a fun experiment. So yeah, that's kind of what Animals has been up to. And then I have just been trying to grow as a guitar player and I'm not an engineer, but I tried to get better at Logic and drum programming and mixing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just like all the downtime and the isolation essentially really made me want to be able to at least make a decent sounding demo, on my own.
Right.
So I just been, YouTube is incredible for how do I change the quantization grid in Logic to triplets? Looking this stuff up.
Dude, I literally did that yesterday. I was working on a video and I'm working in Luna now, and I couldn't figure out how to basically drop in a drum loop and have it basically warp to the tempo that I'm in. I'm on YouTube just looking all this stuff up. That's a whole genre of YouTube channels and videos, and the people that do it well, they know that the video should not be longer than 60 seconds or a minute. There's no intro, no subscribe here. Just I want to go straight into it, show me the thing, and then get out. If you do that well and consistently, then people will stick around, Yeah,
it's funny you bring that up because my girlfriend is a photographer, and sometimes she's trying to look up stuff with editing, and she's always pissed off that she has to watch some intro and some, whole thing. And I don't know if it's different in the photography arena, but I'm just I think if someone is like into this sort of like the teaching demo thing, it might be cool to have someone who's just like, yo, straight to it. Literally what you Googled is like the first words like out of my mouth.
Exactly. I see that so many times. It's like, man, listen, like I get it. You're out here trying to hustle. I'm probably not going to follow you on Instagram. I just want to know how to, bounce this drum track out to a bus in Logic. Like that's all I need to know.
Yeah. It's a fine balance.
So on the writing stuff, I'm interested, the whole sort of idea behind this season of my podcast is talking to not just guitar players, but musicians in general who have done something that I think is incredibly hard, especially on guitar, which is you've developed your own sound, your own unique sound, so much so that within the first few notes, you can instantly tell us TOSIN ABASI. I had Greg Koch on. I think he's another example of that, So, but with you and me, like my musical background and what I'm basically a frustrated boomer in a millennial's body. I like blues and rock and soul stuff and psychedelic stuff. But I've been listening to quite a bit of Animals recently, and because part of it's Rick has been on my ass about opening up my musical sort of spectrum here. And I'm in love with what you guys do because you are taking things in a progressive way and I don't know how else to describe it, but everything relates back to a groove. This is a long-winded way to ask you, what is the writing process like with you and Animals as leaders? Like, how do you get to where you get with these arrangements and these movements and everything? It's amazing.
Damn. Well, thank you. And I'm happy you're digging the stuff. That's cool. Let me see. All right. Animals as Leaders is essentially, or at least it had its genesis almost as a solo project for me. So it's guitar-centric compositions. Like, I would basically get on the guitar and just start riffing, and not just start riffing, but when you pick up the guitar, either you're going to play something you've played before, or maybe you just start streaming ideas and you're like, you notice something happens musically. You're like, whoa, and then maybe you try to do it again. And then you start to like refine it into like some sort of musical phrase. I have these happy accidents with riffs that are like that. And then the other avenue to create for me is technique wise. I use a lot of different techniques, and they're kind of like foundational to some of the songs are almost like studies of certain techniques, or like,
right.
You know what I mean? Where I'm like, so I would oftentimes try to make musical practice out of learning a new technique. So I wouldn't just like play it in a dry way. I would try to like, if I'm economy picking or whatever, I try to plug in 3 chords that sound cool as like a sweep pattern or whatever.
Right.
So moral of the story is it's usually I'm working on a technique that I'm obsessed with, or I have a happy accident. And then from there, I just try to capture that moment of inspiration and like start to apply some conscious thought to it.
Right.
So, yeah, I think having a loop pedal is really sick, because I don't know if you have this issue with workflow. Maybe you're really fast in like your DAWs. No? Yeah. No. It can be like, so for me, if I have a loop pedal, it's a really easy way to capture something and to set it in motion.
Right.
And then, yeah, so I can layer a different part or like a top line or whatever. So then you duplicate yourself with like a very low amount of effort. You're not like arming a track and setting the inputs and like, you know what I mean?
That's actually huge. And I'm glad you touched on that, because that's something that I never really heard people talk about when I first started getting into the like production and engineering side of things. Workflow and just even figuring out like the physical layout of your space, I feel like is really important. If you have to, if you want to change sounds for a different track and you have to get up and go grab another guitar and set up a new amp or new thing, that is interrupting your creative flow. And I run into that with the DAW all the time. It's like, okay, cool. I got a drum track down. Now I got to set up for a bass track. Now I got to set up for another guitar track. So you utilize the loop pedal to just eliminate most of that, right?
Yeah, I mean it has its limitations, but it works really well, especially if you're doing you describe soul and rock and like some of the genres that are foundational to your style. I think a loop pedal will work really well with that stuff. What was I going to say? I wanted to ask you real quick, slight tangent, but like with your workstation, where do you have your pedal board accessible in the same space that you can record yourself?
Yeah, I do. So it's literally like, I don't know if you can see back here. I was shooting a video with a Marshall. So basically, I've gone away from miking cabs just because I'm limited in the space. I can't really do it. And a lot of these amps, I mean, this is a 100-watt plexi. If I tried to mic this while sitting next to it, I would go deaf. So I'm using like the aux or the Captor X, and then I have my pedal board on the floor right next to my desk, and it either will go straight into the front of the amp, or sometimes I'll patch it into the patch bay so I can put drums through it or bass through it or whatever. But yeah, it's easily accessible. Okay,
that's something I've got to figure out. But moral of the story is, I know that inspiration and creativity is fleeting, and at any point in time that I'm trying to write, but I've got to like do a bunch of clicking and stuff like that, I just really want to avoid that. And it's part of the reason that I never really got into recording. I actually preferred just only having to play guitar while the engineer is like seamlessly capturing all the stuff, you know? So, but like the actual process for Animals is there'll be a guitar centric idea. It'll usually have 2 to 3 parts, right? I think if you have 2 to 3 sections that work together, you have the kernel of a song.
Right.
And so I will track that into a DAW. We use Logic often, or Pro Tools. And then from there, we really begin to like write.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a computer based. We're not in the rehearsal space, like, jamming it out.
Yeah. So you essentially are putting the arrangement together. You're essentially orchestrating, right? It sounds to me as a listener who's sort of just seeing the completed piece and trying to chisel my way into, how did this happen? How did they put this together? I'm fascinated by this idea of people's workflows and stuff because everyone's different. So you guys are essentially orchestrating and writing and then going back and learning parts to be able to pull it off live.
Yeah. This is like full disclosure, because the finished product, like you see us playing it live, it's like you don't really know how the sausage was made or whatever, but like we have to learn often what we have written, and it could be as simple as like, well, I can play all the parts individually, but I haven't played them all the way through as like a performance ever because I haven't had to do that.
Right.
Or it's like, dude, I hope I can play this live.
Has that ever in the studio or in the writing session ever held you back from putting an idea down on tape because you're like, I don't know if I can pull this off?
To be honest, I am like sufficiently like unreasonable to where I will like, there are virtually impossible things that at the moment when they were committed to tape, it was like, so we record with Misha Mansour a lot from Periphery, and he was always like, he's like, dude, you have to play this live. He's like, all right, as long as you can play it live.
Like, you're committing. No, that like if you settle on this take, if we comp this together and that's the one, you have to do it.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, I've actually started to appreciate that as like a type of, it's kind of like you exceed your current ability and then you force yourself to meet that new standard that's just right above where you're at. Like I was with Jason Richardson the other day, and he was mentioning that he writes a lot in Guitar Pro. He'll compose a full-on, solo or a guitar part, and then he'll go and learn it on the fingerboard. And I thought that was cool because he's purely composing in that way that like, you know, classical composers would sit with no instruments.
Right.
And I think that there's a purity to literally just conceiving of things as opposed to mechanically doing it. And but you know, you end up with these curveballs where you're like, dude, the fingering, this is like, you know what I mean? How can I do this? How can I switch to my neck pickup and also anyway? So we are guilty of like, really pushing the envelope with like the tools that come with modern recording.
Right.
And then, but we really pride ourselves on being a live band. So yeah,
that's huge, man. I think the live element, the fact that you can pull it off live, to me is why I think you guys have become, and specifically you have become, one of the most prolific guitar players of our time. I mean, you know, we both went to AIM, both AIM grads, and I went down there to have a meeting with Knight like sometime late last year. And I hadn't been around there for probably 6 or 7 years. And he was kind of catching me up on everything around there. And he was saying that most of the guitar students there now are playing extended range instruments and are into progressive metal and into the scene because you went there. And that's huge to me. I mean, that to me shows the impact that you're having on the guitar world, you know, which is pretty compelling, I'd say.
Damn. Yeah, no, I feel that. And shout out to Knight. He's a good guy. And AIM was like really, I think, a bridge for me from like intuitive understanding to like, oh, I really like augmented major triads, or, you know, a minor 5 is an altered dominant chord. Like, I didn't know any of that stuff.
Right.
And it was cool to like put concepts to what I was already hearing and like tasting, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then the influence part is really cool because like I know that all my motivation to play has come from the players, like these monumental guitar players who have blown my mind. And I'm just like, that's possible. Wow. I should really, how long did that guy practice?
Right.
Like, what did he do? You know? And, yeah. So I think inspiration is like one of the most valuable like phenomena on the planet. Like as humans, there's so many things to experience, but inspiration is a type of like, it's like a hope, but it's also a motivation, and it's also a potential. And I just really love, like, I remember I used to go to clinics. My older brother, Abdul, was a drummer, right? And this is when I was like in middle school and stuff. And he would want to go to these drum clinics at our local music stores. So I saw people like Akira Jimbo or Greg Bisonet or whatever. I was watching drum clinics, but I'm a guitarist. But I remember it felt like magical to see a professional drummer like do all this stuff, and I'm sitting on the floor of the local music store, and it just felt like magic almost. Like
yeah. Dude, my first quarter at AIM, Dave Weckl came and did a clinic, and obviously I was a guitar student, but I went and I had that very similar experience to that. My background growing up before AIM was, you know, I picked up guitar like 13, was completely self-taught. Nobody in my family are musicians or anything. I didn't know you could play guitar or music for a living. I didn't think that was a thing. And ended up, after failing out of a couple colleges, at AIM, and finally figured out that was where I needed to be. But I remember watching that Dave Weckl clinic, and that was the first time I really saw like a prolific virtuoso in person in the room, and it was mind-blowing to me, utterly mind-blowing. So on the influence thing, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to kind of find out, like, so you're from DC originally. What was your early like guitar playing life like? What were you doing? What were you into?
Yeah, dude. All right. So I started at the age of 12, and at that point in time, like Pearl Jam and Nirvana and like Green Day and like Alice in Chains, like all that stuff was like alternative rock was the name of the game. Like Bush and freaking, it was just like alternative rock radio was huge, and all I knew of the guitar was really what was on heavy rotation, like MTV or rock radio. So it's kind of funny, but once I learned a bar chord, I could play like all of my favorites.
You're not wrong, dude.
Like I can play guitar. I learned it. Like every Nirvana song is like, okay, well, where does the bar chord go next? So it was just like, cool, guitar is great. And you know what, dude? I've thought about this because new guitar players today are like thrown into a sea of insane guitar players. And what I mean is their exposure to the heights of like guitar playing virtuosity is just like on their explore page. And it's like, oh my God. And it never ends. And then if you want to start learning, it's like, all right, well, what's a mode? And then you click on that and you're like, oh, there's modes of the, you know, harmonic minor scale. There's modes of the melodic. And every hyperlink gets you deeper and deeper into a rabbit. And you're talking about Messian modes and you don't even know what Lydian is at this point. And so like, I remember this is pre-internet. So I didn't have that issue of overwhelming exposure and overwhelming information. And I actually think, I wonder how many guitars wash out because it's almost overwhelming as far as like how much they are seeing. You know what I mean? If you're seeing John Petrucci, you know, or whoever, and you barely can play an open chord, it can feel like you've got like this mountain to climb. So moral of the story is I think I benefited from not having a lot of exposure to crazy guitar playing. And then I was able to build over time. So the early days was like alternative rock. And then I got into like Incubus and, you know, Radiohead and like, eventually, because of my older brother, he was showing me stuff because there was a lot of crazy drummers, and Mike Portnoy was like, you know, doing a Modern Drummer Festival thing that he had on VHS, and then it kind of like became this sort of like causal chain to discover Dream Theater and John Petrucci, and then that started to open up the whole like sort of progressive music and virtuosic guitar playing.
Right.
There's a music store in the DC area called Chuck Levin's Washington Music Center. And it's like, do you know that store?
I don't. Do you know Action Music outside of DC? You ever been up there?
Action Music? No, I don't.
Okay. That's the only like DC area store that I know, but continue.
Okay. Moral of the story is great independent music store, and they had REH videos. They had Hot Licks videos. And I'd go in and like the bigger the hair on the like the video box.
This guy knows what's up.
So I go in there, I'd be like, you know, all right, Paul Gilbert, cool. Let me get this one. And then it's like, oh, you know, Tony McAlpine, Greg Howe, you know, Frank Gambale, you know. And then I was also seeing like people like Steve Vai and Zach Wilde and stuff on the cover of Guitar World magazine. And I remember hearing Yngwie Malmsteen for the first time and just like literally being blown away just because of like the whole classical thing.
Right.
But I remember getting Steve Vai's Passion and Warfare, and it combined like the virtuoso guitar playing with like a huge amount of like personality, and then the compositions weren't just rock songs. They like went into very, you know, he has a background in composition and he played with Zappa, so it was like this confluence of like more than just playing fast to like a 4/4 beat. Like this guy was like making the guitar sound like speech, and then he was also having these like crazy matched accented, you know, parts. So I hope I'm not rambling, but
no, this is great. This is great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think Passion and Warfare in particular was the first time I was like, you can do a whole album without vocals, and the songs feel like songs, but they're also very like imaginative. And like there was also a lot of the shred stuff that I was practicing was like very localized in like natural minor or pentatonic, you know, and it was guys like Satriani and Vai and Petrucci that I started to hear a lot more modal harmony.
Right.
I I think Satriani has a lot of songs that are like beautiful studies and modes like Lydian and stuff like that, where he's really fleshing out the color of that mode in like a really well written way. But that started to make my ear kind of gravitate towards harmony. And then it began this sort of like fusion thing, because I'm like looking for players. I discovered Sean Lane, and then I discovered Alan Holdsworth. Then I discovered, because I was like, oh, it's not only like virtuosity with technique. There's a complexity to harmony that is also like on that level. And how cool is it when you plug in interesting harmony into advanced like technique?
Right.
And then that basically like my style became like a mixture of like early 90s, late 80s shred guitar and like things like Killswitch Engage style riffs, because like metalcore was really big at the time. And like this is like the internet was still burgeoning, so a lot of dudes, like I was in a local band and a lot of dudes had never seen Sweet Picking before. Right. They'd never, because they're listening to Hatebreed and stuff, right? And then right. I show up, I'm like, yeah, I've got these like Hot Licks videos at home that showed me all this crazy stuff.
You're totally right about the internet, though, like because I've actually had that conversation with Knight again to talk about the kids who are coming into AIM now. He said, they have this patchwork of crazy in-depth harmonic knowledge, but are lacking a lot of the fundamentals. Like they skipped over the major modes and the harmonized major scale and went straight to melodic minor and all this kind of stuff. And so they the past couple of years at AIM, they've kind of had to like unpack and figure out where to plug stuff in and okay, you're missing this, but this kind of stuff. And it's because of Instagram and YouTube. You can literally just jump to whatever level you want right out of the gate. And I agree. I'm really glad that the internet wasn't a thing really when I started playing, because I also think it helped develop my ear, learning from CDs and all that kind of stuff. But what do you think for you early on? It seems pretty quickly you gravitated towards the sort of intense virtuosos, the virtuosity of these players. Like what was it about the styles of music that you really dove into when you started your kind of guitar journey? What do you think led you down that path?
That's a good question. I remember this like feeling of achievement when I could like simply like when I learned a power chord or I learned a new song, and I kind of became addicted to that reward. Like you couldn't do something, then you practice for like a week or a month, and then you can do it. It's like when you learn to ride a bike. Do you know how to ride a bike?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool.
I ride all the time.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
It was like an impossible task when you first approached it. You know?
Yeah.
And then the sense of achievement when you can ride it is like really kind of crazy. And I feel like the guitar has these mini like achievements like all the time.
Right.
And I was like, I had never done an activity that I didn't know where the ceiling was. And like, I was kind of like, all right, well, I can play all these Nirvana songs. That's cool. But then I'd hear like a Hendrix solo or a Van Halen thing. And I'd be like, yo. And I guess I'm just attracted to the combination of expression and ability, like on a high level. I don't know why. Like my brain really gravitates towards these sort of like Olympian players.
I was about to say it's almost like a sense of athleticism in a way, right? It's like the physical element of the instrument seemed to attract you at a certain age. Like, okay, I can't do this thing, but it's funny you brought up the bike thing because my wife and I are big like cyclists. We ride on the road and mountain bike all the time. It's like our big thing now. And we have that same sort of pursuit in that hobby, which for us, which is like, okay, I can ride 25 miles, but I want to be able to ride 25 miles in this time frame, or there's this climb that I can't get that I'm going to like make my project I'm going to work on. And it is that same sort of vein that I'm hearing you describe with your guitar, which is like, I can't do this thing yet, but I'm going to shed for a couple weeks, a month, however long, and then I've got it. Right.
Yeah, you're right. It's literally the same thing. And, music isn't a competition and it's not athletics, but I do think there is a tradition of extreme ability and music. If you look at, some classical pieces were composed for like the virtuoso of the day, right? So a composer would write something and there's a small percentage of people who can execute it. And
right.
But it still has this musical value, because I think human ability is, I don't know. I know I watch a bunch of stuff. Like I could watch Cirque du Soleil and just be mesmerized. And it's humans doing things that sometimes I didn't even know you could do.
Right.
And there's a hard to describe experience that is positive when I see that. You know what I mean? Like it could be anything. It could be figure skating. It could be a race car driver. It could be a BMX dude. But I really love seeing human ability displayed on like a super high level.
Well, it's because there's expression in it. Like you see it and you can, the more you dive into it, you see, so it's like musicianship in a lot of ways. You see someone's style, you see their influence, you see their natural ability and their talent, but you also see how much hard work they put into it. Like that to me, there are a lot of parallels that I'm kind of seeing between the two things. And that's, that's really fascinating, man. That's cool.
Yeah, it still happens. Like when I first moved to LA, Virgil Donati was playing at the Baked Potato and he did a drum solo and he has all of these hi-hats that are controlled by cable. Like he has multiple hi-hat pedals with these remote hi-hats. He was doing a rhythm dispersed through like, I think 3 hi-hats. And then he starts using his hands and like, I got like chills. It was just like, it's almost like magic, It's
right.
like, yeah. So I think I dig that stuff and it's a motivating force for how I play.
That's awesome, man. So you mentioned earlier, being inspired when the writing process, like being inspired by a technique. Where do you find inspiration for a lot of your technique stuff? Because again, for someone like me who kind of comes from the when I found guitar, like it's almost like people like you, my friend Ben Forehand, our mutual friend of ours. Mm-hmm. It's like some people find the instrument and they seem to go maybe forward, and then some people find the instrument and they seem to go backwards, which is not in any way meant to be a negative thing. I think I'm one of those people. It's like I found guitar through Hendrix when I was like 12, and then from Hendrix I started going back. And so for me, most of the technique and stuff that I've played and worked on is kind of in that traditional vein. Where do you find your inspiration or ideas to develop these techniques that you use all the time?
Yeah. I think you're right about that trajectory forward or backward. There's like amazing musical traditions from the past, and it's almost like we'll never get that back in a way. It's everything
right.
from how the gear was made to like how the culture was. And then there's contemporary stuff. I think for me, like my technique sort of inspiration, it foundationally, it started with guys like Paul Gilbert and just because of the speed of the alternate picking. And then it evolved to, so Frank Gambale's got this economy picking technique, extreme fluidity. So I kind of fixated on that for a while. And then I started, it started to become a little less about the guitar per se and more about stringed instruments. Mm-hmm. And this is where I remember seeing Victor Wooten and the Wooten brothers perform live once, and it was another one of those like magic experiences. Like Vic was, he was doing a solo, like not like a solo over a tune, like his solo moment.
Right.
And he was thumping and he started detuning all the strings on his bass. And like progressively it got so low that it wasn't notes anymore. It was just like through the PA, it was just like thunderous. And then he tunes back up without stopping. And then he gets back, he's hitting harmonics and tuning the bass back up while playing. And he's utilizing a combination of thumping and tapping and normal bass playing. I was just like, it was one of those moments where I was like, dude, this guy is, it's not just about the bass anymore. He's kind of manipulating a stringed instrument in a very open-minded way. And so once I discovered the Wooten brothers' approach to tapping, they kind of have a pianistic approach to tapping,
right.
And then the double thumb thing. I just kind of I was lucky enough to be in a band with a guy from Nashville, Evan Brewer, and he had done some lessons with, I think, Reggie Wooten and stuff. So he knew how to do all that stuff, and I was just like, you have to show me how to do all of this. And I think that's where my sound got a little it's kind of like I think that's where my sound ceased to be traditional in any sense of the word. And
sure.
I started thinking in these really open-minded ways. So I'm adding strings to my guitar, and I'm slapping the guitar, and I'm tapping in these ways. And I think that's kind of kind of that last piece to kind of creating whatever it is I'm doing now.
Yeah. So on your sound, I wanted the tone thing is fascinating to me. I'm obsessed with guitar tone. It's probably the one element of guitar to me, well, just music in general, but the timbre of an instrument, the sound quality, the interaction of a guitar and an amp is a huge thing for me. And when I listen to your stuff on Animals, or if I see a video of you doing something online, and I've used your the plugin, Neural DSP plugin, and gone through a lot of your presets, just what is this? What is all this stuff? Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating to me, your combination of DI guitar sounds with amps going on, or super dry DI sort of sound with almost a pad kind of reverb or delay underneath. So where is the sonic inspiration and tonal inspiration coming from for you?
Great question. I think some of it is bread and butter, I need a heavy rhythm guitar tone. And so you gate it and you have a sufficient amount of boost on the front end, and it's just normal high gain tones, right?
Right.
A lot of the lead tones I like are referential of a lot of the shred guys. I think John Petrucci has uniformly incredibly fat lead tone, and it's singing, and it's just nice,
So it sounds like violin in a way.
Yeah, I really dig his approach to tone. So I'll go through that. He's also a guitar player who had to have a lot. He'll have a kind of a chorused out sort of hyper clean sound, and then he'll have a piezo thing, but then he'll also have a super chunky rhythm, and then he'll also have this liquid lead thing. And I remember him standing out to me as one of the shredders who kind of had to really play a supportive role in a band and have a type of versatility that Yngwie Malmsteen didn't need to have,
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of my tone chasing is informed by you mentioned some of the cleans. I really like a lot of synth stuff and electronic music. And so sometimes I want the guitar to sound closer to a harp, or it's a stringed instrument, but it's hyper real or hyper, you know what I mean?
High fidelity in a way.
Yeah. Alan Holdsworth, I think, was a master of making his guitar sound like a synth pad, not just on single note lines, but with his clean tones.
Mm.
And so for some reason, I think it's between that and electronic music. I really like when the guitar sometimes sounds like it wasn't played through an amp per se, or the flavor of reverb on it is something that would be more at home on a synth than a guitar, but it works either way.
Right.
And then the final layer would be the slapping stuff, which, believe it or not, is basically just a Marshall style low gain, crunch tone. And then because the strings are so low, a lot of the actual timbre is actually coming from the string.
Right.
Yeah, and then I voice my pickups to kind of accentuate some of the peaks in the frequency range that I think contribute to that type of bite and sort of presence.
Right. So you are an engineer. I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. You are an audio engineer, because to even talk about voicing your pickups with certain peaks in the EQ to cut through that stuff. I mean, you have to have, I think, a bit of an engineering mind and to really think about that stuff. When do you decide to go for like the plug-in or to go for an amp when you're recording?
That's a really good question, because we're recording now and we're doing shootouts, and like, I'm curious to know what you think about this, but I think the amp simulation IR approach has now gotten to a point of realism and accuracy to where it's like, it used to be a no-brainer, and now it's kind of like, you're running a lot of real amps into a load box, right, with IRs.
Yeah.
And I know you've A/B'd the results, and you're like, this works, this is fine.
So I completely agree. And to the chagrin of people in the comments or people who might be listening, like, because we all know, dude, people on the guitar players, I feel like a lot of times are pretty fundamentalist, like pretty dogmatic in their beliefs. And as someone who's been on the receiving end of a lot of that sort of vitriol, I still take heat for saying this, but I think, dude, the modeling stuff now in the context of a mix, whether it be live or in a record, something like an Axe FX or Helix or a plug-in, like the Neural DSP stuff is insane. I've had the Quad Cortex here this week.
Oh,
it is as good as the real thing in the context of a mix. Where people get, I think, caught up is, standing in a room. If you've ever played a 100-watt plexi or something and stood in front of the cabinet and felt like the concussion of the transient of the note coming out of the 412, well, yeah, that sounds better than a modeler coming through your monitors on your desk, right? Like, and so, but in terms of sound quality, in terms of response, in terms of how the amp feels under your hands, I think we're there, honestly.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And what do you think about, so as an engineer, I feel like a lot of guitar players, because they don't engineer their own stuff, they don't think about basically the variables that can be introduced when you're miking a speaker. So like, how far is that mic? Is that angle exactly where it was when you were tracking yesterday? Well, how loud was the amp? Is it breaking up in the same way? Like, these modelers give you like complete uniformity and consistency.
Right.
Like, you can recall the exact tone, like exactly.
Right.
And it's a workflow thing that's like, or another workflow benefit is that you don't have to commit to a tone immediately. You can track the way you want it, and then you literally can reamp that relative to your mix in such a deliberate way. Right. You're not bogged down by like, this is my favorite, JCM 800, this lady. It's like, all right, dude.
Dude, you just personified half of the comment section on any YouTube video anywhere. I think you're absolutely right. And what's interesting about that is, depending on the player, that's either a feature or a bug. Because depending on what you're going for sonically, like, I've worked with some producers and I wouldn't necessarily call myself an engineer. I'm a guitar player who can engineer things. But I've worked with some people that they embrace that imperfection. I mean, to take that a level further, like an analog tube amp, especially an old one, is going to sound different on a different day on some level. I mean, you've toured and played out with tube amps. You go to a different room with different power, a different stage. The amp sounds completely different every single night. But to some players, that is a feature, right? It's almost like that Jack White school of thought, right? Where it's like, you are sort of dealing with the hand you're dealt in that current situation. You're letting that inform your performance. Mm-hmm. But from what you're doing and a lot of what I'm doing, I do like the fact that, hey, I got a tone that I really love, and I want to be able to replicate that exact thing without having to put gaff tape all over my, grill cloth and try and remember exactly where I had the preamp set and, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think we're kind of articulating there's two sides of this where there's the experience side, like when you were mentioning a full stack, standing in front of that. But it's like that is a subjective experience of tone. And by the time you throw a 57 on that and go into the control room, record it and put it in the mix,
Right.
you're no longer getting hit with that concussive force. And
No.
yeah, so honestly, I like that it all exists because, like, I can see you've got a great amp collection. I've got amps. I've got pedals. I love that pedals are having like a resurgence. Like, I think it's all for the best, honestly. But I will say, last thing, I do really enjoy. No matter how good these modelers are getting, and they're all really incredible. Plugging straight into an amp while you're in the room with it is like a peak purity sort of experience.
It is the benchmark, right? Like as good as a modeler or a plugin can ever get, it'll never surpass that benchmark in that one sort of aspect, right? And you know, that's what people ask me all the time, like, hey, well, you know, why aren't you taking the Helix out on a gig, or why are you using this? It's like, well, because if I can get away with it on a gig, yeah, I'll take the real amp. I'll take the thing. But more often than not, because of limitations on stage size or travel limitations or whatever, you know, it's better off to use something digital. And again, I can hear half the people listening right now, like, turning off the podcast in anger.
You gotta stop reading the comments, bro. You're traumatized.
But that's the thing, man. Like, people don't understand, like, yes, when you're actually in a recording studio, you have to kind of learn to perform under that pressure. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this. But for me, when I first started working in studios, it was actually at Rick's studio. I was interning for him, and I started playing on sessions, and I had a really hard time doing basic things like playing in time and playing in tune, because all of my playing up until that point had been with an amp in a room or on stage or whatever. And when you're listening to your rig mic'd up, basically under a microscope coming through a set of NS10s or whatever, it completely changes how it feels.
Dude, yes. That's why I think a lot of people who are questioning why you would take a real amp to the gig versus the modeler, or why you take the modeler versus the real amp, your subjective interpretation of, so say you're playing through a half stack. Well, your ears are 3 feet above the actual like line of the speaker, and there's all these frequencies that are kind of already, they're just being filtered out by virtue of you not being like super close to it. But you close mic that with a 57 and you're like, does my tone really sound like that? You know? It's like, and then, yeah, I think recording in and of itself is a level of scrutiny that is different than if you're just like jamming by yourself. And I think you're right. It's like, it takes its own type of practice to learn how to do what you do in various contexts. Because like, I think most of us playing guitar are probably creating situations in our home where we're the most comfortable and nothing ever changes.
Right.
It's, you know, your guitars, your setup on your guitars, your favorite string brand, your favorite picks in your room that never really changes through your amps. Okay, well, what happens when you get into that room that is like really high ceilings and super echoey, or you're in a control room and you're nervous and like, you know, you feel really exposed? Like, there's all these variables that are hard to practice without literally going through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or what happens when like a crucial piece of your rig goes down on a set and you have to make it work. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you're right. I think it only comes from experience. You can't watch a YouTube video on that or take a class on that or whatever. It's literally just got to happen for you, you know? So I, on the tone thing, I played an Abasi Concepts for the first time last week at Rick's place, and I was blown away by, again, being a traditional guitar player, I like Les Pauls and Strats and, you know, Novos. I don't know if you're familiar with Novo, but I'm a big fan of like
great guitars.
They're amazing. But that Abasi felt incredible. To me, it was like ergonomically perfect. I played it sitting down. The shape was right. I've never really spent time on a fan fret guitar. It was like everything that should be outside of my comfort zone as a guitar player, but it felt great. So I want to talk about Abasi concepts for a second. Where did that idea come from? The designs, like, what's up with all that?
All the things.
Yeah.
Let me grab one because it might be illustrative. This is one of the first ones. All right. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. This one's an 8-string.
Right.
Where do I start? I don't know. Basically I was an Ibanez artist, and I had a signature Ibanez, but it was like the normal RG shape but more strings. And I really felt like an 8-string guitar kind of deserves like a ground up sort of approach. And more of the story is like I kind of had ordered over time some custom extended range guitars because, you know, when I was at AIM and stuff, like most people never really seen an 8-string or something like that. And I had to find luthiers who could custom make you a guitar, basically. Right. And through that, like I kind of discovered certain features that I thought really made it more playable or were necessary. Things like having a compound scale or fan frets. You know, the individual saddle thing I think is cool when the range of guitar goes as low as this one does. And then there's certain shapes that I felt were worthwhile. Like we have our sort of traditional double cuts or single cuts. But I felt like the ergonomic approach was kind of something newer on my radar, and it was the guys who were making experimental extended range guitars who were also messing with the bodies. There's Canton guitars and Klein. There was some some older builders who were making interesting shapes, but I just basically wanted to design my own 8-string or my own guitar from the ground up that felt really easy to play. Like everything from how lightweight it was to how thin it was to like where it was biased as far as like when you put it in your lap. And I knew that a lot of guitar players would get on a 7-string or 8-string and it didn't feel like a guitar anymore. It would feel kind of like, and so part of my whole thing was to try to make it feel smaller.
Right.
So the neck is shoved quite a bit into the body of the neck, which reduces the actual like span of the guitar quite a bit. And it centers you kind of like above, sorry, I'm not doing a great job, but
it's okay.
Above the 12th fret. So part of my thing with 8-strings and 7-strings is that when they became popular, it was bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit, and, you know, to a lesser known degree, Petrucci and Steve Vai were playing them. But I felt like the guitars were really kind of just like normal guitars with extra strings, and a lot of the ways people were playing them were just riffing, utilizing the lower register to riff. Right. And I knew I wanted to do all kinds of leads and like do all my shred stuff without having to down tune a guitar or feel compromised because it's a 29-inch scale length or something like that.
Right.
So the Lorata is basically like a shreddable 8-string in this variant that is super lightweight, extreme fret access, and, you know, even things like the beveling. I just wanted a seamless experience with the body of the guitar. Right.
Yeah. It's so comfortable, and to an extent, like the way you're describing it, I think there's a reason why I like that, and the reason why I like my Novos, because I think Dennis Fano comes at guitar design from a very similar perspective, which is like, how do I make this thing as comfortable and accessible to play as possible? Again, he's kind of coming at it from the traditional sort of, you know, what if I was designing guitars in 1958 sort of thing. Whereas this is my take on it is like, what can the guitar be next? Like, what's the next step for guitar? Is that too far off base?
No, it's literally what I wanted. I think there's a trajectory of guitar design, but you mentioned this sort of fundamentalism of guitar players, And there's sort of parallel lanes, like, because there was a lot of wacky guitar concepts in the 80s and 90s, right? But the stuff that lasts seems to be the Strats and the Les Pauls and the SGs, and I totally respect that stuff. But I find that, like, if I get on a Les Paul, I do want 24 frets, or maybe where the heel meets the body of there's these things that are like kind of feel in the way. I think if you're playing music that was written when Les Pauls were very popular, you don't hit those barriers. But if you're trying to do some other stuff, it like might not be the perfect tool,
right?
You know. But I guess what I was trying to do is to take elements of like all of this amazing guitar design and make something worthwhile that validated itself because it felt easier to play, and it performed something that was hard to get out of another instrument. Even these Fishman Fluence pickups, like these things can sound, you know, like a Strat, but then also they can sound like a super modern, you know, tight humbucker.
Right. It's funny that like you, because I just had Greg Koch on, and he's using the Fluence stuff too. And it's funny because it kind of calls back to the modeler thing, right? Which is a traditional kind of guitar player might look at something like that and be like, wait, there's what in that pickup? You know, my pickups have Alnico 3 magnets, and, you know, they've got 12,000 turns of copper wire just like God intended, you know. But when you look at actually what a pickup does and what it is, the way Greg was describing his set to me, it was like, oh, that makes all the sense in the world. You're essentially taking a blank canvas, and then you can impart any kind of EQ curve that you want on top of it to make it do whatever you want, which that's all a PAF is doing. It's just doing it inherently in its construction. It's imparting an EQ curve on top of your signal, you know?
Yeah, that's totally true. It's, I think the Fluence stuff, I'm really, like, Greg's pickups sound incredible. We put them in all of our Telecat, our Space Tees.
Dude, I love those so much. It's so cool.
Dude, I want you to try one because
I love that.
But Greg's pickups do a really good job. It's like you get a noiseless single coil that has an underwound setting and then like a hotter setting, and a tone knob that has all these usable positions. Like, it's usable across the range.
Right.
And the thing is just like, it's like a telly from heaven with no noise. It's like
that's so cool, man.
Yeah,
I love it. And you know what else too? The shape, the thing, and I've had this conversation with Dennis several times. Guitar design, like designing guitar shapes, I think has got to be one of the most difficult things to do because it's so easy to colossally screw up a guitar shape. I mean, it's you wouldn't think so, but I've seen a lot of stuff out there, like at NAMM. We've all walked around like NAMM and seen, you know, some of the stuff's like, ooh, boy, that's an interesting shape.
Burn it with fire.
Yeah, and you've done something that is, I think, pretty new and intriguing, but the shape is right to me. The proportions look right. The way even on that telly, like the only thing that says that's a telly is the control plate and the bridge and the pickup layout. Everything else, but it looks good, man. It really does look good.
Thank you. I agree with you, man. It's hard to design an original guitar shape, and then it goes back to the culture of guitar players. They're just like not interested. It's like, I think it's for some reason, the guitar culture is almost religious, and you said dogmatic. It's very true. It's like a commitment to established truth.
Right.
And an inflexibility and almost a hostility towards, like, I don't play guitars with batteries in them. You know, and you're like, all right, cool. Like, did you try it though?
It is the textbook definition of fundamentalism, man. It's exactly what it is. It's and look, I think we've all been probably guilty of it on some. I know I have, but the thing is, every sort of stereotype that I've had in my brain towards a certain type of guitar design or shape or amps or whatever, has every single one that I've come up against and encountered in real life has been completely obliterated by the experience of picking something up and saying, oh, wait, this actually sounds good, or this plays, I like this. And so what that's taught me over the last several years is like, hey, maybe don't be so caught up in your way or the way, just because that's the way like Clapton played something doesn't mean that's the only way to do something. Does that make sense? Yes.
And I think, I don't want to sound like we're being harsh on traditionalists, because I think there's a reason. Like, they know what they like, and there is some foundational truth to certain things. There's the if it ain't broke adage, right? Like,
right.
But I will say, you could feel that way, but still have an open mind, because you never know when you're going to be surprised. And I think it's cool because, like, I've obviously had my own lane. Like, I've had to design my own guitars in a way, and I choose my own gear. But there's a lot of gear that's coming on my radar that I didn't actually think I would like. Like, I've got a Matchless Chieftain or Clubman right here, right?
That's a great amp.
The Fano guitars, adult Tosin is appreciating those things, and like teenage Tosin wouldn't have like looked twice, But I'm like, oh man, you really use like, light finishes with the paint, and it really like allows the guitar to breathe. And like, oh dude, P90s, dude, that's awesome,
Yeah.
But that's not a thing I think, the 20-year-old me would have responded to. So I have to like call myself out too for being like kind of having a tunnel vision with like knowing or thinking I know all I need without considering like a JCM 800 with a boost is like pretty ripping, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Maybe that's what your metal band needs,
Right. Dude, I've gone through the same thing, with gear, with music recently, just kind of realizing like, I just turned 30 this year, and just sort of like, okay, you know what? It's time to sort of expand my horizons. It's like, I know that I will always like a Les Paul Jr. with ripping P90s into a Tweed Deluxe. I will always love that sound. And I always know that I can go back to that sound whenever I want. But what else is out there that I currently don't know that I really love, or that I will really love until I figure it out, So yeah, that's it's funny that you talk about adult Tosin and teenage Tosin, because it's like a growth thing. We all go through it.
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember I was shred obsessed, and I would have older guitar players be like, "Oh, this happened at AIM." They're like, "Yeah, that's cool, but you're gonna slow down. You'll slow down." And I remember like, it's not a phase. Like, you don't know me. Now I'm just like trying to get better at playing the blues.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's hysterical, man. Who was there when you were there? It was like Carl Culpepper and Randy Hexter and all those guys.
All those dudes. Carl. Who else was there?
Bill Hart. Remember Bill?
Bill. What was his last name?
Hart.
Yeah, Bill Hart, and damn, Troy Wright.
Trey Wright.
Trey Wright, my bad.
Yeah.
Great teacher. He was one of my favorites. He was like,
dude, me too. Because I knew nothing about jazz or anything before I started AIM, and I will never forget the first time I ever heard Kind of Blue was in Trey Wright's classroom, and that had like a massive impact on me. So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, and who am I forgetting? I mean, dude, I was at AIM like over 10 years ago. So
what years were you there?
I think I was there in 2006, like 2005 to 2006. So it's been
15 years.
It's been a minute. Damn. I'm old, bro.
Oh, yeah. I was there in 2010 to 2011, and it was great, but it was like drinking from a fire hose for me. But Tosin, this has been great, man. Thank you so much for taking the time and coming on. Anything you wanna plug? You wanna shout out for a single coming out? Something like that?
Nothing. We don't even have track names. Just, follow Animals as Leader socials if you're into progressive metal, and Abasi Concepts if you like guitars. And yeah, I think that's about it. This
Nice.
was fun though. I'm glad we got a chance to finally talk.
Yeah, man. So that was my interview with Tosin Abasi. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that this is the first of many things that I get to do with Tosin over the near future. just what a cool guy. And I really enjoy his work and what he's doing. So don't forget to check out his social media and everything. I'll have that all linked down below, as well as the Animals as Leaders stuff. But most of you probably already know and follow him anyways, but still, give the man a plug. If you are watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe here to the second channel to be up to date on future episodes of Backstage Journal. They happen every week. We're going to be putting them up live every Thursday here on YouTube. And if you want to catch it in audio form, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and my website, rhettshull.com. And if you want to support me and the channel and the podcast and everything we got going on, you can support that all directly through my website, rhettshull.com. My Helix presets, Kemper profiles, video courses, everything will be hosted over there, as well as merch and things for the show. Actually, yeah, we should do some merch for the show. If you guys have any merch ideas for the show, let me know in the comments section down below. Also, let me know who you want to see on this season of the podcast. I've already got a handful of guests lined up and in the bag that are killer. But let me know who you want to see on the show. So with that, hope you enjoyed the first episode. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening, and I will see y'all next week here on Backstage Journal Podcast.